The Wyoming wind swept across the valley with a mournful cry, stirring the brittle grass and carrying with it the faint scent of pine from the distant ridges. The Wilson ranch house stood weather-beaten yet strong, its timbers darkened by years of storms and seasons. Inside, Sarah Wilson moved quietly, her hands brushing dust from the window frame, her heart heavier than the sky above. Since her husband's passing 2 winters ago, every creak of the floorboards and whistle of the wind reminded her that she was alone, struggling to hold together the land that once thrived with his laughter. Her days were long, spent mending fences, hauling water, and trying to keep the herd alive on thinning pastures. Nights were longer still, silence pressing in on her like a weight she could barely bear. The neighbors were kind enough, offering to help when they could, but there was only so much charity a proud woman could accept. Offers to buy the ranch had come often, men with sharp eyes and colder intentions, ready to take advantage of a widow's plight. Sarah held firm, not out of stubbornness alone, but out of loyalty to her husband's memory. This land had been his dream. That afternoon, as shadows stretched across the porch and the sun dipped behind the western hills, Sarah heard it, a knock firm and deliberate, echoing against the wood of her front door. Her heart quickened. Strangers were not rare on the frontier, but they always carried with them the uncertainty of trouble. Wiping her hands on her apron, she walked to the door, each step cautious. The knock came again, steady, not rushed, not timid. She drew in a breath, pulled the door open, and there he stood, a tall cowboy hat in hand, boots worn from countless miles of trail behind him. The man's eyes, the color of weathered oak, held a mixture of strength and gentleness. His coat was dusted from travel, his shoulders broad from years of labor. He inclined his head politely, his voice low yet clear as he spoke. "I was told you needed a rancher," he said. The words hung between them, simple yet weighted, as if carried by more than mere circumstance. Sarah studied him, her lips parting slightly, but before she could form a reply, she saw movement. A little girl peeked out from behind him, half hidden by the folds of his coat, clutching a worn rag doll to her chest. The sight startled Sarah. The girl's eyes were wide, curious but shy, her cheeks flushed from the cool evening air. She looked no older than 6, her hair tangled by the wind, her dress patched yet clean. Sarah felt something stir within her chest, a pang of recognition she had not expected. She had seen too much of grief and loneliness, but this child carried in her gaze a quiet resilience. It softened the sharpness of Sarah's sorrow in an instant. She looked back at the cowboy, questions rising faster than words could be spoken. Who was he? What did he want? The cowboy straightened, shifting his weight slightly, but his tone remained respectful. "Name's Luke Turner," he said. "I heard from a neighbor down by the creek that you might be in need of help. I've worked cattle near Montana, driven herds across Nebraska, fixed more fences than I care to count. I don't ask for much, just fair work and a place for my daughter to lay her head." He glanced back at the girl, whose small fingers clutched his sleeve, as though she feared the ground might give way if she let go. His voice softened. "Her name's Annie." Sarah hesitated, her hand tightening on the doorframe. Every instinct warned her against quick trust. The frontier could be cruel, and a woman alone had little room for misjudgment. Yet something about the way he carried himself, the wariness in his stance, the honesty in his words, spoke louder than her fear. "I didn't put word out for a rancher," she said cautiously, her eyes narrowing just enough to measure him. "But it's true I've more work than I can manage alone." Her gaze shifted once more to the girl, who met her eyes briefly before hiding behind her father's leg. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the whistle of the wind across the porch. Finally, Sarah stepped back, her voice firm but not unkind. "You'd better come in before the cold sets deeper." Luke nodded once, grateful, and ushered Annie inside. The warmth of the small home greeted them, though it was modest, its furnishings simple and worn by years of use. Annie's eyes wandered curiously, taking in the shelves lined with books, the hearth where a low fire crackled, the quilt draped neatly over a rocking chair. To her it must have felt like stepping into a place where roots could grow. As Luke set his hat down near the door, Sarah busied herself with the kettle, her hands steady though her mind raced. She poured hot water into tin cups, sliding one toward him across the table. He accepted it with a nod, his calloused hands wrapping around the warmth as though it were the first comfort he had felt in days. Annie sat quietly beside him, her doll perched on her lap, her wide eyes never straying far from Sarah. The widow found herself softening despite her caution, the child's presence reminding her of the son who slept soundly in the room beyond. Conversation came slowly at first, like the tentative steps of a cult testing new ground. Luke spoke of his travels, of losing his wife when Annie was born, of drifting from ranch to ranch in search of steady work and a place his daughter might belong. Sarah listened, her heart caught between sympathy and self-preservation. She asked few questions, though each answer revealed more of the man's character. His resilience, his quiet dignity, his devotion to the little girl who clung to his side. For all his strength, it was clear his greatest burden was not the weight of labor, but of love unmoored. The night deepened, stars scattering across the sky beyond the window. Sarah set bread and stew before them, the simple meal shared in silence, broken only by the clink of spoons against bowls. Luke ate with gratitude, every bite measured, while Annie's small hands moved quickly, hunger betraying the long miles they had traveled. Sarah watched them, her own appetite dulled by the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. Could she trust him? Could she risk opening her home and her heart to another, after so much had already been lost? Yet as she watched Annie's tired head droop against her father's arm, she felt the walls within her shift. When the dishes were cleared and Annie finally drifted to sleep on a folded quilt near the hearth, Luke rose to his feet. "Will not trouble you longer," he said quietly, his voice carrying a humility that struck Sarah deeply. "If you've no need for my hand, we'll move on come morning." Sarah's breath caught, her hand instinctively tightening on the edge of the table. She looked at Annie, curled peacefully by the fire, and then at Luke, who stood tall yet wary, a man shaped by loss but not broken by it. Something in her, long dormant, stirred with unexpected clarity. "You can stay," she said at last, her words firm though her heart pounded. "For now. There's work enough here for two, and the nights are too cold for a child to be wandering the road." Luke met her gaze, gratitude flickering in his eyes, though he offered no empty words. He simply nodded, his shoulders easing slightly as though a great weight had been lifted. Sarah turned away then, busying herself with small tasks, unwilling to let him see the storm of emotions rising within her. She had opened her door out of necessity, but perhaps, just perhaps, fate had guided his knock. Outside the wind quieted, the valley settling into a rare stillness. The ranch house, once heavy with silence, now held the faint rhythm of new breath, of a man and his daughter finding shelter, of a widow unknowingly opening the first page of a story not yet written. Sarah paused by the window, her eyes lingering on the stars scattered like promises across the night sky. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, nor whether trust would bloom or fracture. But for the first time in many months, she felt something she thought she had lost forever, the faint, fragile stirrings of hope. The morning sun rose slow and golden over the Wyoming valley, spreading warmth across the frost-tipped fields. Sarah stood at the porch, her shawl pulled tight, watching as Luke Turner saddled an old bay horse that had not been ridden since her husband's passing. His movements were steady, practiced, each tug of the cinch strap revealing years of experience. Annie sat nearby on the porch steps, humming to herself while tracing little lines in the dust with a stick. For the first time in a long while, the ranch did not feel empty. It felt alive, as though the land itself breathed easier. Luke rode out into the pasture with Sarah's son, Ben, at his side. The boy had been shy at first, wary of the stranger who appeared at his mother's door, but the lure of riding again had broken through his hesitation. Sarah watched them from the fence line, the sight of her son grinning wide stirring something warm in her chest. It had been so long since she had seen that kind of joy. She wondered if it was dangerous to hope, if hope itself was a risk greater than the debts and the drought threatening the ranch. Days stretched into weeks, and Luke's presence on the ranch became as natural as the sunrise. He repaired fences with swift precision, brought the cattle down from higher grazing, and mended the broken windmill that had sat useless for months. Sarah had always prided herself on resilience, but she could not deny the relief that came from another set of strong hands. More than once, she found herself pausing at the sight of Luke working, the sun on his back, the quiet determination etched into his face. It was not weakness to accept help, she reminded herself. It was survival. Annie grew quickly comfortable in her new surroundings. She followed Sarah in the kitchen, eager to help with small tasks, her laughter echoing against the walls that had grown too accustomed to silence. Ben, once protective of his routines, soon found in Annie a companion, their games spilling across the fields until dusk painted the sky. Sarah would watch them from the porch, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, the ache of grief in her heart dulled by the sight of children's laughter. It was a sound she had missed deeply, one she had thought the ranch would never hear again. Despite the ease of their days, Sarah remained cautious. She had been hardened by loss, wary of trusting too much in what might be taken away. At night, after the house grew quiet, she would sit by the hearth and wonder at the road that had brought Luke Turner to her door. Was it chance, or something more? She did not yet allow herself to name the feeling growing within her chest when he looked her way, or the way her hands trembled slightly when she brushed against his while clearing the supper table. These were dangerous stirrings, and she feared them. One evening, as autumn winds began to bite, Luke lingered on the porch after supper. Sarah stepped out, the lantern glow from the kitchen casting a soft light between them. "Your boy's got a good hand with rope," Luke said, his tone easy. "He'll be a fine rancher one day." Sarah smiled faintly, pride tugging at her lips. "He learned from his father," she replied, her voice low. A silence settled then, comfortable yet charged, broken only by the creak of the porch boards beneath their weight. For a moment, Sarah felt as though she were standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. The challenges of the ranch did not ease with time. The cattle grew restless as grass thinned, and storms loomed on the horizon. Yet with Luke's help, Sarah found herself no longer facing each hardship alone. When a calf went missing, Luke and Ben rode out together and returned with it safe. When the roof of the barn began to sag under heavy winds, Luke climbed to mend it while Sarah steadied the ladder below, her heart pounding with a fear she dared not speak. Each trial bound them closer, though neither gave voice to the bond forming quietly between them. Annie, with the sharp instincts of a child, noticed what her father did not. One evening, as Sarah tucked her into bed beside the warm glow of the fire, Annie whispered, "You smile more now." Sarah paused, her hands stilling on the quilt. "Do I?" she asked softly. Annie nodded, her wide eyes innocent yet knowing. "Papa smiles more too. He don't say it, but I think he likes it here." Sarah's throat tightened. She brushed a stray curl from the child's forehead, pressing a kiss gently to her temple. Out of the mouths of children, truth often found its way. The first snow fell early that year, blanketing the valley in white. The ranch house became a haven against the bitter cold, firelight flickering warmly within its walls. The days shortened, filled with the rhythm of feeding cattle and chopping wood. Evenings brought quiet gatherings by the hearth, where Annie and Ben played while Luke and Sarah shared stories of years gone by. Slowly, Sarah found herself opening parts of her life she had kept hidden since her husband's death. She spoke of dreams abandoned, of burdens carried, and Luke listened, never judging, only offering the kind of steady presence she had missed. One night, when the storm outside howled fierce, the lantern light flickering against the windows, Sarah confessed what weighed on her most. "I nearly sold the ranch last spring," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I thought I couldn't keep it alive alone." Luke looked at her, his gaze steady, unwavering. "But you didn't," he said simply. "You held on." His words, spoken without pity, settled deep into her heart. For the first time, she allowed herself to see not just survival in her actions, but strength. She had not failed. She had endured. And now she was no longer enduring alone. The bond between Luke and Ben deepened as winter pressed on. Luke taught the boy how to read the sky for storms, how to mend a broken bridle. How to ride with confidence rather than fear. Sarah watched with quiet wonder, grateful for the guidance her son so desperately needed. Annie, too, blossomed in the warmth of the Wilson home. She began to hum as she worked, to dance barefoot across the wooden floors, to giggle with Ben until Sarah had to shush them for the night. It was as though the ranch itself had been waiting for their laughter to return. Spring thaw came slowly, the snow retreating to reveal the earth beneath. Wildflowers began to dot the hillsides, and with them came a sense of renewal. Sarah found herself lingering by Luke's side as they worked, her hand brushing against his as they carried buckets, her heart beating quicker when their eyes met. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Luke paused, his hat held nervously in his hand. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "I came here looking for work. I never expected to find more than that." His words faltered, but his meaning was clear. Sarah's breath caught her chest tight. She had feared this moment, longed for it, dreaded it all at once. "Luke," she whispered, "I've lost once already. I can't." Her voice broke, and she turned away, tears burning her eyes. But before silence could crush the moment, Luke stepped closer, his presence steady, grounding. "I ain't asking you to forget," he said softly. "I know what it means to lose. I only ask for a chance to build something new, from the pieces life left us." Sarah closed her eyes, his words sinking deep, and for the first time, she did not feel afraid. Seasons turned again each day, weaving them closer into the fabric of one another's lives. The ranch grew strong with Luke's help, the cattle thriving, the fields mending. Sarah found joy not just in survival, but in the life being built around her. Ben flourished under Luke's guidance, Annie thrived under Sarah's care, and together the two children became inseparable. What had begun with a knock at her door had grown into something larger, something lasting. Sarah no longer saw herself as a widow clinging to memory, but as a woman standing on the threshold of a new beginning. One quiet evening, as twilight spread across the valley and fireflies danced in the tall grass, Sarah stood once more on the porch. Luke came to stand beside her, his hand brushing against hers. She did not pull away. Instead, she let her fingers rest lightly against his, the simple touch speaking more than words ever could. They watched the land stretch before them, not as burden, but as promise. For within its hills and fields, its hardships and beauty, they had found not just survival, but love, family, and the chance to start again. And that was enough.